Improving the resilience of South Carolina's communities, economies, and ecosystems requires an understanding of current and predicted future conditions across the state. Through the strategic statewide resilience and risk reduction planning process, the Office of Resilience has utilized data describing the state's natural and built environment, risks and opportunities, and community indicators. All this information, however, is gathered and maintained by many agencies, so finding the right information and comparing information from different sources can be challenging. In the 2023 Resilience Plan, the South Carolina Office of Resilience recommended pulling together the data we regularly consider into a comprehensive and easy-to-use mapping tool now known as the Resilience Atlas. Any user has the ability to visualize data on the map and pull up data from different sources at the same time. Essentially, creating custom maps to contextualize our state is now a straightforward process with the Atlas. In addition to this visual component, the Atlas also serves as a connecting point to the many data sources that informed our vulnerability assessment. So let's take a look at what the Atlas offers and how to effectively use it. When you open the Atlas, you'll start out with a state map with county lines visible. From here, there are a few ways to start interacting with the map. First, you can use the search feature in the upper right-hand corner to find addresses and specific locations. See how if we search for Greenville, South Carolina, and select it from the search suggestions, the map viewer will automatically zoom in on the city? Now click and hold the mouse to start panning around the map. Think of this as sliding the map in whichever direction you move your mouse. We can also zoom in or out using the plus and minus buttons in the upper left-hand corner of the viewer, or by rolling the scroll wheel on your mouse up or down. Notice how the map zooms in wherever the cursor is located when you scroll up on the mouse wheel? Finally, let's change the base map, or the canvas on top of which we will be layering our data. Right now, it's set to the default, which is a lightly colored terrain with labels for counties, cities, towns, and so forth. We can change this with the button under the search bar in the top right corner. Let's say we want to see a satellite image of South Carolina. We have a couple options. Scroll down the list to imagery, which is just a pure satellite picture of the area, or switch to the imagery hybrid to include labels like street names and landmarks. Let's reset the Atlas by hitting refresh on the web browser. Now looking over to the left, we have a sidebar where the data is located. In the Resilience Atlas, data is formatted into map layers. Think of a layer as a very specific type of information that we can choose whether to show or not. Consider a map of a park in your community, for example. There's the park boundary, but then there are the paths, parking lots, swing sets, streams, and trees. Each of those different components could be represented by a separate layer since they indicate different things. We could then choose whether to show certain layers or not, depending on what we care most about knowing. So if we need to know where to park, we could choose to show only the parking spaces and hide the layers that we are less concerned with. This is essentially what we are doing with the layers in the Resilience Atlas. Now, you'll find layers grouped in the left sidebar into broad themes. Notice that while it looks like they're almost all visible already, because of the blue check marks, the map looks pretty empty. This is because while the group is indeed active, the individual layers within each group are not. Here's how we can tell that we're looking at groups. See the small arrow next to the check mark? It's indicating that there are layers within this group, and we can see them by clicking on the arrow. Actually, we're seeing one layer, USA Wetlands, and 3 more groups within the main group. These chains of groups within groups are common in the Atlas and help logically organize all of the available data. Now let's learn how to interact with the map's layers. Say we're interested in seeing the state's rivers. We see that they are slightly visible on the base map, but we would like them to stand out. So in the Natural Landscape group, we will click the arrow beside North America Lakes and Rivers to show the 2 layers, one for lakes and one for rivers. Now if we only check the box next to North America Lakes, nothing happens. So we also have to make sure the group North America Lakes and Rivers is active, which then shows the state's lakes in a bright blue on top of the base map. A quick note that turning on a layer will not make it appear instantly, although it shouldn't take too long. That data will need to be loaded via internet before it can be drawn. Let's keep this layer active and add another few. We'll start by also turning on rivers. Now that we have a pretty good picture of the major waterways in the state, we can look at how these natural landscape features relate to man-made structures, or what we call the built landscape, such as roadways or dams. We can easily display the locations of dams in the state since the South Carolina Department of Environmental Services keeps this data up to date. To find it, we need to go to the Built Landscape group, then look under SCEMD Lifelines, specifically Hazard Lifelines, and we've got a layer for dams. When looking at the whole state, this is a lot of information, so let's focus on just one area, Berkeley County. We can type Berkeley County into the search bar, and the map will zoom and pan over once we select it from the search suggestions. Now that our screen is less busy, we can start interacting with the layers. First, see how Lake Moultrie is covering up some of the dam markers? We can fix that by changing the order of the layers. In fact, the order that the layers are listed in the sidebar is the order in which they will be stacked on the map. So layers at the top of the list will be stacked on top of the ones below. We can change this order simply by clicking and dragging individual layers within the group or entire groups themselves. So let's take the built landscape group and drag it on top of the list. Now that we can see where the dams are more clearly, let's next find out what the different colors mean. This is where we will use the legend, also located in the sidebar. This is a tab next to the map layers, and it stays up to date with all the active layers on the map. For the dams layer, it shows us 4 possible colors for each dam, indicating the hazard levels. Now that we've got a few layers active and arranged how we want, let's go through the green tools at the top of the left sidebar. Generally, these tools can help us navigate the atlas more efficiently and interact with the map layers in unique ways. Starting on the left, we have our bookmarks. Think of these to save your settings, including where you've zoomed into and which layers are active. There are already 7 here, which are programmed to zoom to the different watershed basins in and around the state. To make a new bookmark, we first need to make sure that we have activated all the layers we want and that we've already zoomed and panned to the part of the map that we're interested in viewing. Once that's all set, we can click on the Bookmarks tool, scroll to the bottom, and hit the plus sign. This instantly creates a bookmark, and we can click on it to type a descriptive name. Now this comes in handy when we want to quickly pull all this information back up at a later time. We can test it out now by refreshing the page to return the atlas to its starting screen. Now if we click on the bookmarks, we'll see that the new one we just created at the bottom of the list is still there. Clicking on it will zoom us into Berkeley County and activate the rivers, lakes, and dams layers. Beware that it did not reorder the layers in the same way that we had them before, so we will still have to do that step ourselves. Keep in mind that your bookmarks will only stay in the atlas if you keep using the same internet browser and you do not delete your browser cookies. Otherwise, they will reset and disappear. Moving along, we have a selection tool. Of course, you can click on different parts of the map to select them and bring up extra information, like when we click on Lake Moultrie and this pop-up box appears. The content in these boxes changes depending on which layer an item belongs to, so you'll always be seeing relevant information. Now let's say you want to select multiple items at once. That's where the selection tool can help. When you click on this tool, you'll see a list of layers similar to the main list in the sidebar. Here, however, you're telling the selection tool from which layers it should be selecting items. This list will update itself with the layers that are currently being shown on the map, but you can change this as you like. So if we do not want to select counties when we click on the map, we can uncheck this box and the tool will ignore the counties. To actually use the selection tool, we need to decide how we want to make our selections. We can see our options by clicking the small arrow in the upper left corner of this tool. Doing so gives us a short list of selection types. The first one, select by rectangle, is pretty straightforward. If we turn on the tool by clicking the button right next to the drop-down arrow, we can now click and drag on the map to draw a rectangle. Any map features either partway or completely within this rectangle will now be selected when we let go of the mouse. Notice how the little box in the bottom right corner updates to show us the number of different map features that are currently selected. We can click on this to recenter the map on our group of selected items. We can also look back at the list of layers under the selection tool, and now the number of selected items on each layer is shown. Looking at the other selection items, there is also a lasso selection, which allows you to draw your own unique shape to select items. And then there is a select by point tool, which gives you a small circle that can be used to precisely select map features. Lastly, clearing a selection is as simple as clicking the clear selection tool in the upper left corner of the map. While we're here, notice how you can turn on the selection tool on and off right here instead of going to the left sidebar. So while the full tool in the sidebar is useful for designating exactly which map layer should be available for selection, you can go straight to this button if you don't need to change those settings. Notice here how there's also the option to tell the tool to select items either partially or within the selection space, such as the rectangle or lasso, or just completely within the space, meaning an object will only be selected if the rectangle completely covers it. Next up is the Draw tool, which allows us to put our own objects on the map, such as shapes, markers, and lines. On our screen, let's say we want to circle the group of high hazard level dams along Lake Moultrie. Well, clicking on the tool will pop the window out with a few options. From left to right, the first couple buttons are for selecting things that we've already drawn, so we will come back to them in a moment. The next set of buttons are the different types of drawings we can add. There are points, which you can use to mark specific locations, polylines, which are where you can add your own shape by clicking once to add corners and double-clicking to finish drawing the line. And lastly, we have a draw polygon, which operates much in the same way as a polyline, but with the difference being the shape remains closed the whole time we're drawing it, like this. The last two are more straightforward. You can draw both a regular rectangle or circle by clicking and dragging your mouse over the area you want the shape to cover. Now, whenever we click on one of these tools, notice that we are given some options for how we want the shapes to look. These are just a few suggestions that have different amounts of transparency so that we can choose how well we can see through the drawing to the map layers underneath. We can also choose the exact colors we want for the shape's color and the border color by clicking these two boxes. So, let's circle this group of high hazard dams along the side of Lake Moultrie. Start by choosing the Draw Circle button. Then we'll put our mouse on the point that we want to be the center of our circle, and then we can click and drag outwards to make our shape. Next, let's say we just want to have the circle outline, but no fill color on the inside of the shape. We can do that by going back up to the Draw tool and choosing the Select feature. You can think of this as basically putting the mouse back into its normal mode instead of the drawing mode. Click on the circle to select it and then hit this eraser button. To change things like the shape's color, we will have to first make those selections before drawing the shape. Going back to the Draw Circle button, let's first make sure there's no fill color. A quick way to do this is to drag the slider in the middle of the window all the way to the left. This is telling the atlas to show 0% of the color that would normally be inside the shape. You can set this to any percent for different levels of transparency, which you see previewed on the left box above the slider. Next, let's pick a color for the circle's outline. We will do this by clicking in the middle box above the slider. Let's make this a red circle by moving the slider like so and clicking in the red rectangle on the shade we like best. Now we can just click somewhere back on the main style window to close this out. Finally, the box with 1.5 in it next to the two color boxes tells the atlas how thick we want the shape outline to be, with higher numbers resulting in a larger line. Now we can draw the circle again just like the first time, and there we have it. The next tool is the elevation profile. This lets us see the height of different places on our map above sea level. Now this tool is unique because we are not looking at the height of just one single point on the map, but rather we are going to draw a path and see how the elevation changes along that path. So let's practice by looking at how elevation changes from the lowest or southernmost dam in our circle to the middle of Monk's Corner, a town just over 1.5 miles away. We'll start by opening the tool and clicking the Draw button. Now, on the map, we will click once to start our line and double-click where we want it to end. If we wanted to, we could keep clicking once at a time in different places to give the line corners and follow a unique path, just like if we were drawing the polygon line tool. For now, we will keep it simple and just make it a straight line between our two locations. Once we draw this line, the tool will generate this graph for us. Let's look at a few things here. First, the measurements are made in metric automatically, but we can switch to using feet and miles by pressing this gear button and choosing the type of measurement we want. Now, what we are looking at here is the height above sea level for each point along the line we just drew. As we go from left to right along the graph, we are going from the dam to Monk's Corner. So what we are seeing is the ground stays pretty even at somewhere just over 60 feet above sea level until about halfway between our 2 points. Then the ground level slopes down and back up as we approach Monk's Corner, and finally levels out just under 60 feet as we reach the center of town. Notice that as we move the mouse along this graph, the white text box shows us the elevation along the line that we drew. Meanwhile, the two black text boxes on either side of the graph simply line up with where the mouse is actually sitting on the graph, and don't necessarily tell us anything about the land elevation that we're measuring. A couple quick features that this tool has is the summary here that tells us useful facts like the highest and lowest points along our line, as well as how steep on average the slopes are along the line. Next, we can reverse the direction of the line, and by pressing this, the graph now shows how the elevation changes on our way from Monk's Corner back to the dam. Finally, experienced users can export the data that forms this elevation graph to use somewhere else or save in their computers. On that note, the last two tools are geared towards those with experience using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. First off, it's possible to add data to the Resilience Atlas. Essentially, you can add even more layers to the atlas if you have them saved from another source or if you have a link to them. There's also a list of possible layers ready to be added from ArcGIS Online, which is searchable. Finally, licensed ArcGIS users have access to the detailed analysis tools, which enable them to uncover even more in-depth findings while using the atlas. Now that we've gone through an overview of the different tools we can use to interact with the Resilience Atlas, let's print off a map that we've been working with. The printing tool is in the upper right corner along the top blue bar. Let's take a minute to look at all the different options here, since you can use them to create professional maps for all kinds of planning and presentation purposes. First, we can choose our paper size here. These 4 choices are essentially just variations on 2 main formats, letter and tabloid. Think of letter as your standard sheet of printer paper, which would be 8.5 by 11 inches. Tabloid is a longer version of this, at 11 by 17 inches, so think of this as 2 letter-sized papers right next to each other. Both of these 2 paper sizes can be turned so that they are tall and thin, which is called portrait, or they can flip long ways, which is landscape. Going down the list, we can add a title, which will be added to our map when we're ready to print. Let's call this one Berkeley County Dams. Now, the last of the main options is choosing the file format. Our options are PDF, which is best for printing out maps, or PNG, which is a great way of saving your map as a picture that's viewed on screen. Before we go into the advanced settings, let's check this bottom box here to show the printing area. This confirms that the area highlighted in blue is what's going to be printed. In our case, everything in our map viewer should be printed out. Actually, more than what we can see on our screen will be printed, and we'll see why that is in just a moment. For now, remember that this area will change depending on which paper size we've selected. Let's see how this changes by popping open the advanced printing settings. The first set of options we have is for map printing extents, which will let us be more specific about which area of our map we want to print. For example, watch what happens when we change from current map extent to current map scale. Now we can see the entire area that will be printed. So what does that tell us about the first option we were looking at? Well, for the current map extent option, the left and right sides of the box were stretched out until they were touching the sides of our screen, and thus the top and bottom edges extended above and below the edges of our screen. Now if we zoom in or out, the box stays the same size on our screen, so this could be the better option for anyone who wants to see the entire printable area. Let's say you want to lock in the size of this blue box while zooming in and out. Go ahead and change the setting to the Set Map Scale option. Now, the size of the printing area remains the same as you zoom in and out. The position, however, is not locked, so whenever you pan around the map, the box will stay in the center of your screen instead of locked to a location on the map. If you want to change the size of the box once it's locked, just hit this refresh button and the box will snap to the size of your current window and lock itself again. And of course, this box changes shape depending on which paper size we've selected. Moving on down, there are text boxes for you to enter an author's name if you choose, as well as any copyright information you would like to state. The last few options are quick details. If you do not have to choose one way or another, there will be a legend included as well as an arrow showing which direction is north. You can choose whether to use miles or kilometers when showing distances on your map for larger areas, or choose between feet and meters for maps of much smaller areas. Lastly, you can choose the sharpness or quality of your map in terms of dots per inch, or DPI. The higher the number, the more clarity your image will have, but it will also take longer to be generated and be a larger file size. For most purposes, 100 will look good, although if you need very high quality maps, 300 will work well. All right, let's hit print. Now this step will not actually send anything to your printer. Instead, the atlas will take a minute to create either a PDF or PNG with all the specifications that we just gave it. This could take a few moments depending on the complexity of your map and settings. When the document is ready, you'll see it appear under the Results tab in the printing menu. From here, you can save your final product electronically or send it to your printer. There you have it. We were able to navigate around the map, change the base map, activate and reorder layers to show relevant information on top of the base map, interpret what the layers were showing us by using the legend, gather additional information using the tools, and print off our work. It's important to know that the Atlas intended to constantly undergo updates and improvements as new data sources are published. Thus, the Resilience Atlas will remain a current, up-to-date resource for separate state and federal agencies to continue and collect and update their data. We also hope to continue introducing new features and tools to the Atlas to make it even more of a comprehensive tool for decision makers and anyone interested in resilience in South Carolina. We hope you enjoy exploring the Atlas.